Zhu Qingyu Palace Poem. Silence. Palace gates imprison palace flowers. Lovelies standing side by side along the jade veranda. They'd love to talk about the palace goings on, but with the parrot close by, they dare not say a word. So we continue with the heptasyllabic quatrains, and now we have two pieces by Zhu Qingyu. In fact, the only two poems of his that are included in the collection. So let's talk a little bit about this Zhu Qingyu. He was born around 800, and even though his name is Zhu Qingyu, he is generally known by his courtesy name Qingyu. And we know that he passed the Jinshi examinations in the 820s, and that he was a protege and a friend of Zhang Yi, which is a poet we've already encountered. Zhang Yi was a mid-Tang poet and very representative for his moralistic, socially conscientious poems in the style of the Xinjue Fu of Baijiu Ji. And therefore, this would place Zhu Qingyu as a late Middle Tang, early late Tang poet. I mean, the frontiers are diffuse. Generally, the mid Tang is considered to be the years going from, let's say, the An Lushan rebellion to the death of Emperor Xuanzong, who was murdered by a eunuch, I think in 820 or 823 approximately. And especially in the years of this last emperor, especially during the Zhuang He era, it was a period of recovery of imperial power and of, or at least partial recovery and submission of many of the warlords to imperial power. But after the 820s, and especially after an incident, the Sweet Dew incident, which takes place, I don't know the date right now, probably also in the 820s, this is an incident in which eunuchs murder a minister who wanted to get rid of them, and eunuchs are becoming a very strong power behind the throne in the late Tang, capable of putting puppet emperors on the throne and of getting them dethroned and killed. So you could say the late Tang probably begins in the 820s, 830s, and is a period characterized by factional infighting at court between the Li and Niu factions, control of the emperors by eunuchs, misgovernment, greed, a series of economic and natural disasters which are not properly dealt with, and after a few years, a series of massive peasant revolts that bring the dynasty to its knees. You could say that after 880, after the Huangqiao rebellion, which sacks the capital, the empire exists only in name until 906, 907. So anyway, Zhu Qingyu is a late Tang poet, although he starts writing in the mid-Tang. He starts becoming a scholar official in the mid-Tang, and he is close friends of people like Shangji and Yadao, whom we consider mid-Tang poets. And as for his career, after passing the examinations, we know he was appointed editor in the palace library, but later abandoned an official career and traveled to the border regions. So let's move on to this palace poem of his. This poem is very typical of other palace poems we've encountered in this anthology, so I won't talk much about the genre, except to recap that palace poems are generally delicate, ornamental, and superficial. They generally depict the life of the belles, of the concubines and imperial wives who live in luxurious splendor, but also in ennui and sadness, melancholy and boredom within the imperial precincts. And these poems generally paint them as objects of beauty to be described, like jewelry or any other precious items. And there's a certain slightly voyeuristic element in this tradition of allowing the reader and the poet to imagine and to gaze into the forbidden women of the forbidden palace. Now, this poem falls squarely within that tradition. And paraphrasing it, this poem just tells of a little anecdote. It's probably the end of the day. At the end of the day, the imperial palace is closed. During the day, at least part of the imperial palace, which is really more of an imperial city, is populated by civil servants, the scholar officials who go in the morning to serve in the offices and then go back at night. But at night, the palace doors are closed. The only ones who remain inside would be, there might be some civil servants locked inside the palace in their offices for night shift or night duty. But basically, the palace, just gets restricted to the emperor himself, his soldiers and guardsmen, his concubines, and the eunuchs and servants of the imperial palace. In fact, a part of the imperial palace where the imperial women are is generally considered, sometimes it's called the Forbidden City. It's the part of the palace or the pavilions where the emperor enjoys himself with his women and where usually the only men allowed are eunuchs. So we've got the first couplet of this poem paints us a scene in which we see the women of the emperor's lovers depicted as flowers, referred to indirectly as beautiful flowers that grow in the imperial garden, locked in and almost shown in a sort of exhibition, one next to the other along a jade veranda. So the first couplet says, "Silence, palace gates imprison palace flowers, lovely standing side by side along the jade veranda." So we must imagine in one of the pavilions of the Forbidden City, all the hustle and bustle coming from nearby pavilions of the civil servants and the audiences shutting down. Those people go away. It's silent. It's probably dusk. The women probably are able now to go out into the veranda and allow themselves to be seen because the civil servants are no longer there to look at them. They are prisoners. They're birds in a gilded cage, and this image has appeared in a previous poem about the palace women that we've read. So the gates are locked, and the women are, they are trapped in luxury, but they're trapped inside. They can't get out. These beautiful flowers, and flowers as metaphors for women, is a very conventional trope. And we have this garden of beauties all along a jade veranda. Jade veranda, well, marble, probably not really jade. They're lounging on a terrace and on a veranda, looking out at the imperial palace. And also for the poet, if not for other people except the emperor, exhibiting their beauty and their finesse. So the second couplet, so the first one is more descriptive. The second one delves a little bit into their subjectivity, which is pretty common in quatrains. So the second couplet represents what they are thinking or what they are feeling. And it says, "They'd love to talk about the palace goings on, but with the parrot close by, they dare not say a word." So the women would like to chat. I imagine the life of palace women is pretty dull, pretty boring when they're not being visited by the emperor. So they probably dedicated this time to toilette and painting themselves, dressing themselves, playing games, and with a chit-chat that is typical of closed and aristocratic and pretty bored societies. So one would imagine that this bunch of women all together would start, gossiping about the latest happenings in the imperial court, a favored concubine, some deed of the emperor, some purchase or some new good or exotic product arriving. But they're kept quiet. Why? For this we need to delve into their thoughts, and the poet tells us why they are silent. They'd love to talk about palace rumor and chit-chat, but there's a parrot. Now, as you know, parrots are famous for being able to repeat, not to speak, but to repeat human sounds. So they are afraid that the chit-chat they might say might be repeated by that parrot who is in a nearby chamber, and therefore be made public. And this parrot might be a symbolic parrot. It might not be an actual bird, but it might refer to some imperial spy or some eunuch. Perhaps what they want to talk is slightly controversial or offensive or dangerous, so they would really not like it to escape to prying ears. And I think that's all. It's a pretty simple poem, just a courtly scene of bored palace women within the palace.